Hello there and welcome to this vlog of January 2024. And first of all, let's deal with the elephant in the room, because I think in the last video I said that I would be back to a usual routine, and then I haven't been able to record in at least 2 weeks now, might be a little bit longer than that. I did post something about this on the channel, just work and the redevelopment of the house have just gotten in the way of everything. I am going to keep posting videos, but I just think I have to admit to myself that the regular, like 2 weekly videos that I was doing previously are going to be disrupted for quite a while. In a way, the timing's quite good because we're in a real I suppose blackout period in terms of like BattleTech news, and a lot of the content that I do is around like the commercial aspects of BattleTech. But at the moment, everyone's just waiting for the Kickstarter, and we had some pretty big announcements before Christmas in terms of the new force packs that are coming out, but it's just kind of it's a bit of a black hole, I think, at the moment. And I think from a retail standpoint as well, there's obviously the big run up to Christmas, and then January and February are usually seen as like lull periods outside of those sectors that have the big sales things going on. Obviously, hobby space usually isn't in that area, so for us, pretty quiet time. And I would have loved to have used this time to do lots of lore content, but just can't do it. I've come back a few times to try and do it, and then the builders have been in and it's too noisy, or things have been going on at work and I've had to be on site at offices. So yeah, it's just a disruptive time at the moment, and I don't envisage that ending realistically for another 6 to 8 weeks. It's actually got so bad that I had to step out of doing my usual DFA commitments with Aaron and Tom. So they went and filmed a new jump point, and we had a guest for that, a very good guest. So it should be a good one. But yeah, it's just a bit of a tough time at the moment in regards that I am quite time poor. Anyway, update over. Let's get into today's video, because I have got a free day today for the first time in a long time. So I'm going to sit and I'm going to paint some miniatures. I'm actually going to do the first Lao Hussars today. I think I'm going to paint up a couple of lances for that. And I thought I will squeeze in a recording early days, early morning. And then I'll get this out next week. And what I wanted to discuss today was what is, I suppose, collectively known across BattleTech as the Three Brothers. I don't know, I don't think that's a formal term. I think that's just something that the fans say. I don't know if I've never seen this in any official communication from anybody at BattleTech who's involved in the canon or in the writing or anything. I think it's just because these are three of the, as the kids say, OG mechs. They're all very, very early on in the BattleTech journey. They're all the same tonnage, and they all fulfill similar but slightly different roles. And that is, of course, if you are, a BattleTech fan, you'll know what I'm talking about straight away. That's the Wolverine, the Shadowheart, and the Griffin. Now, I have to caveat this before I talk about it, just in a couple of areas, and that's that I will only be talking today about the original OG 3 variants. So that's the Shadowheart 2H, the Wolverine 6R, and the Griffin 1N. There are obviously dozens of variants of these mechs, and when people say things like, well, I don't like this particular mech, well, the chances are that if you're playing in the Ilkhan era, you will find a mech that's completely compatible with your playstyle or tactics, and will have the armor levels that you want, or the kind of weaponry that you want, or the jump jets that you want, things like that. So, keep that in mind, that whenever I'm ever posting videos like this, or anyone else for that matter is posting videos like this, it always just assumed that we're talking about, the original variants. Otherwise, yeah, I'd have to do 100 videos on a cross-reference between all the different variants, and that's just silly. So these are the 3 original variants of these mechs. And I suppose like my hypothesis, that might be a bit too strong a word here, is going to be very different from, I think, a lot of people's. And I will talk about it at the end of the video, because I want to break down all three mechs and the advantages of all three, and talk about like the zeitgeist in the community of where these three mechs rank against each other, and against like, you know, the general BattleTech play styles as well, up to the succession wars. And that's my second, leads me into my second caveat here, that I am only really talking here about like the end of the succession wars. Obviously you get certain variants of these mechs in the Star League era, like there is the Griffin, like the Lost Tech version of the Griffin, which is a pretty incredible mech. Certainly better than the 1N, which we'll talk about. But yeah, so it kind of exists, I suppose, in a vacuum. Back end of the succession wars, just these three variants, which is, if you're looking at it in terms of a lore narrative perspective, that is what the three brothers come from, right? So when people refer to the three brothers, strictly speaking, they are speaking of these three. Obviously, then BattleTech, you know, advances in storyline, and these mechs start to change, and their roles start to change because they start getting better equipment strapped onto them, and they get better like internal structure systems and heat management and all that good stuff. But for now, yeah, we're very much at the rugged end of space in the in like the succession wars with these three mechs. So let's get the obvious one out of the way then. In terms of these three mechs, because the zeitgeist always holds to the fact that the Wolverine is the best mech out of the three. And, you know, speaking very objectively on this, I think the Wolverine is an incredible mech. I think in like the Succession War era, it's one of, if not the best cavalry mechs. It's pretty much got everything you want to fulfill that role, and it's very, very popular. And I love the Wolverine as well. I love how it looks. It does have some negative quirks, but for the purposes of this video, we won't be talking about that. I think it's got the like the cramped cockpit quirk, but again, they're kind of outside of the remit of, you know, when you're kind of analysing this kind of stuff, because that's something you'd usually put in for, you know, for narrative play. You can obviously use it in like in a competitive sense, but I think it's built in there as a, you know, really kind of a narrative thing. The fact that, like, you know, your mech warrior is in this tiny little cockpit, and it basically means that they have a, you know, they've got like, it impacts on their like piloting ability because their arms are all scrunched up or whatever. I don't think in a, you know, if you're playing a competition scene, you're not really going to go in for that. So I'm going to leave all that on the side here and not judge it. And at the end of this, when I kind of get into my hypothesis, I'm going to tell you why I think the Wolverine is not actually the best mech. But again, that's just as it all stands alone across all the data that you have across the, well, what we're using here, which is the Flex Sheet, which is a wonderful app. If you've never heard of it, go check it out. You can do all your real-time damage management on this in the form of an app. Not sponsored by them, but I always talk about Flex because I absolutely love Flex. I think it's wonderful software. So let's delve into it then and have a look at the 6R. And as always, start at the top. So movement profile is excellent for a Succession Wars 55 tonner. It's a 585, so it's got incredible levels of, you know, like speed and maneuverability. I personally love jump jets on a mech. I know a lot of people will just sacrifice it to get more guns on the table. I get that, but I like to play my games slightly strategically and tactically. So I do try to do the flanking thing, and having jump jets is, you know, very useful for that. There is a reason why jump jets are very expensive in terms of battle value. And that is why, because if you meet a player who kind of knows what they're doing on tabletop and you give them mechs with jump jets, they can really kind of take you apart just from positionals. Not always. I think you've got to have experience playing that way, and you've got to kind of know what you're doing. But generally speaking, that's why they get that little bit of extra cost, just so, you know, opponents that don't play that way don't just get run off the table. That's my feeling about it anyway. I'm sure that, you know, someone may say that's not why they did it, but that's how I've always viewed it. So fast mech, in fact all these mechs, so the Shadowheart, the Wolverine and the Griffin are all the same like engine type, so they're all 5.8. They do have differences in jumping though, and we'll get into that. In terms of weapon loadout, again for a cav mech, Wolverine's absolutely brilliant. For that tonnage, you've kind of got that like. I always kind of use that. It's an analogy of like it's a tin opener and a spoon to kind of scoop out the tomato goodness or whatever is in the tin. And to do kind of the can opening, you've got like the AC5. The medium laser then supports that as well because they obviously both do 5 damage. Not the greatest. I mean, they're not like it's not like having a bigger auto cannon on there, but it's not for a cavalry mech that's sufficient. Especially if you're doing it at an angle flank. So if you're kind of coming in from the right side of a mech and you're hitting on the right arc, you've got a higher chance of hitting those two weapons on like the right leg or the right torso or the right arm. So you can potentially do like 10 levels of damage relatively easy to the same location, or much more so if you're hitting it head on. Again, remember it's a cavalry mech, so you probably are going to be able to get those positionals on your opponent. And then you've got kind of the spoon to scoop out the innards. Ooh, it's a horrible analogy of the opponent with the SRM6, because then you basically ping in your SRM6s, and if you get good hit on the cluster roll, you can do up to 12 points of damage. It gives you a chance at doing criticals. Yeah, really kind of textbook like weaponry you'd like to see there for a cav mech. It's almost like, because it's fast, everything else on it is then so just like average, that becomes then effective. And if we kind of look at the armor, you'll see what I mean by that, because the armor on this mech is pretty solid. Like, it's not brilliant, it's not terrible, it's just solid. That's all it needs to be. Having just a solid weapon loadout with those positional advantages that you've got via the speed, perfect. You don't need it to be like flashy, or to have really like to be over equipped on there, or to basically get to a point where it can't heat manage. And we'll talk about heat management on this mech in a second. So yeah, really like proficient mech at what it wants to do. You can see it has got 12 heat sinks. So if we go back to our weapon management here, keep in mind, obviously, that we are jumping 5. So if you are skirmishing correctly, you'll always be running at 8, or you'll be jumping. I mean, the Wolverine can be used in other roles, so there might be a point where you walk it. But generally speaking, I think you are going to want to go in, quite hard and quite fast with the Wolverine. So just assume that you're going to be at 5 levels of heat, or 5 points of heat. That gives us 7 more points of heat to play with, and you can see pretty good there, right? Because we've basically got there an 8 total of heat. So if we're going in at a full jump and then firing everything we've got, we're only generating 1 point of heat. That is excellent. I would always play the additional rule of rapid fire auto cannons. So the auto cannon might then get bumped up to 2 heat if you're deciding to do 2 shots from the regular AC5. If you are doing that, it's only another point, so that brings you up to 9. So it's a very, very, very heat efficient mech. I consider any mech that can do like an alpha strike at and a jump, or its full move within that like +2 to -2 ratio of like being heat neutral, I consider that to be a really quite heat efficient mech. If it's too much, if it's like, say, a mech where you've got like a -7, that's not efficient. There's too much that you've not kind of optimized your weaponry enough, so you're losing out on a lot of that like tonnage. Likewise, and the obvious one is when it's too hot. So if you've got like a +12 mech in regards to an alpha strike and its move, you really can't ever use that efficiently. So again, you're losing out on that like tonnage to weapon ratio, whatever you want to call it, that makes your mech efficient and gets you as much like juice as you can out of the battle value that you're paying for it. Let's just have a look at placements then of critical slots. That's always very important. I actually think the Wolverine's not great at this. This is where I think it falls down slightly. You can see here we've got the AC5 ammo on the arm. It actually looks great on the model, actually, because this on the new plastic models, which come in a Game of Armoured Combat. It's a beautiful model. It's the new Wolverine. The gun looks like it's been almost like strapped onto the arm. And I think you can kind of see, like, I mean, I can't say this for sure, but it looks like that's kind of where the ammo is positioned in there. So that kind of makes sense that, that it is on the right arm. In terms of it as a placement of death because sometimes you can put ammo on places where it will just be horrifyingly bad for your mech. I think it's actually fine on the right arm because there is so much padding here. You've got all your actuators, you've got your autocannon 5 which takes up 4 slots as well, so you've got a pretty decent chance of never popping that AC5 ammo. I'd always advise that you do play with the rapid fire options as well. That will allow you to basically expend more ammo, do more potential damage to an enemy. And that's good because that means you'll rattle through the ammo more quickly. So you'll be able to get through it all in 10 turns. So by the time that it's ever going to become an issue, you might only have a couple of points of ammo left in there anywhere. And you can see obviously that's going to burn through your internal structure on any medium mech if it goes pop. But just having 20 points on there, not the worst thing in the world. Where I think the Wolverine has problems is in the left and the right torso area. Now the armor for these areas is okay, it's 20 points on each section, which is pretty solid. But if you are unfortunate enough to get crits on there, or you're playing the floating crits rule, you've only got one heat sink padding out the right torso. That can be really problematic because then things will get into your center torso quite quickly if those crits transfer. And, obviously a mech that is reliant on its speed is going to be devastated by, gyro hits and fusion hits. That's just going to really, ruin its ability to do what you want it to do on tabletop. And then likewise on the left side, you've just always got that damage. You've got that 1 in 3 chance of popping the SRM6 ammo. And again, SRM6s, you can't basically do the rapid fire option like with the auto cannons. It's going to take you a full 15 turns to get through all that. So, unless you dump the ammo, you're always going to have a little bit in there. And that's problematic because if you've got, say, 8 points of ammo left in there and it goes pop, your mech is dead. So there's basically nothing you can do about that. And I think that does make the Wolverine very, very susceptible to damage. To problems in terms of basically making it either dangerous through ammo explosions or getting into that center torso to do those horrifying criticals, which will just mess up a cavalry mech's day. You can kind of get away with it with some mechs. If you kind of get engine hits on a turret mech, it doesn't really matter. You're slow anyway, so yeah, it's not great, and you're going to generate more heat. But yeah, I'd much rather have it on a something like an Awesome, which just kind of sits there and pings off PPCs from long range, as opposed to a mech that is just really reliant on its ability to move. One good thing that I think the Wolverine does have, though, it does have its jump jets in its legs. I do like that. On clan mechs, I love it if they put double heat sinks in the legs. You can't do that with double heat sinks with the Ionosphere because they take up 3 slots, and obviously all legs in BattleTech have those 4 points, so that would give you a total of 7 slots and there are only 6 in the legs. But I like it because if you get any leg damage, you've got that 1 in 3 chance of just hitting a jump jet instead of an actuator, which can really kind of slow your mech down, which is problematic again for a cavalry mech. So that's the Wolverine. I'd give it very much just objectively within its peer group in the Succession Wars. For those medium to all the light heavy mechs, things like the catapult, things like that, I'd consider it really would consider it B plus tier. I think where it does lack or where it does have problems is just in that side torsos, and it is a problem. I've got to say, whenever I've played the Wolverine before, it's either come up or I can't get it to work properly because it takes damage there, and then I'm a little bit less cavalier about wanting to get in there because maybe I've lost this heat sink on the right torso, and I then am just so worried about, okay, if I get any more crits on that side, it's going to go right through to the center torso, and then my mech's just going to be dead in the water. So you don't have that option to just kind of turn around and be like, right, I'm just going to show you my left hand side for this. It's a mech which is it's very dangerous to itself, but it can change the fortunes of war. Cavalry mechs are what will decimate your enemy. If you can kind of get in there with a cavalry mech, get rear shots in, it's what scares your enemy. It's what prompts people to make mistakes when they're thinking too quickly or they're focusing just on a mech like the Wolverine. So Brilliant mech, absolutely love it, but it does have its problems. And I just would say to people, as much as the rhetoric out there is that the Wolverine is this all singing, all dancing cavalry mech in the Succession Wars, it is lacking in certain areas on the defensive front, in my opinion. So next up, let's have a look at the Griffin. This is the Griffin one, and again, exactly the same speed profile or maneuverability profile as the Wolverine. It's a 585, which is great. The role of the Griffin, though, is wholly different. So you can see it's basically a skirmish mech. So it's rocking a PPC and an LRM-10. That's really quite solid levels of damage, for a 55 tonner that's not getting in there and doing, like full levels of action. Very solid. You can basically just keep it on the periphery of the battlefield, just pinging off those like long range weapons. The weapons as well have great synergy. I didn't really talk about synergy with the Wolverine, but I think those weapons do work in synergy with each other for a cavalry mech, because you're obviously closing with the AC5 and then you use the M-Lasers and the SRM6 as you get up a little bit closer. With this mech though, you are going to just annoy your opponent by firing off that PPC and LRM-10. The one thing that really lets the Griffin down, there are several things, because I think it is by far the weakest of the three brothers, that's its heat management. 12 heat sinks, and then you've got a PPC and LRM4 that do 14 points of heat. So that's +2 already. Then we have the 5 jumping. That gives us a 7+. That is not heat efficient to me, especially for a skirmish mech that you probably do want to be, kind of maneuverable on the, looking for those like positionals to skirmish the enemy. So you are going to be jumping or running. It's not easy to it's not hard to fix it. Like, you just have to not fire the PPC for a turn, but that like eats into the efficiency of your mech. That will cool you down, or you just basically stand still for a turn. If you can kind of get in some woods or behind some cover, then yeah, you can make it work. I'm not saying the Griffin is a terrible mech by any stretch, but the one thing that really lets the Griffin down for me, outside of the heat management, because everything else is solid, right? The weapon loadout is solid. The armor levels are very similar to like the Wolverine, so they're very solid. In fact, you'd probably say it's a little bit too armored, considering you're probably never going to get it up close and personal with the enemy. So you could probably drop a bit of that and put some more heat sinks on there. That would be beneficial. Where the Griffin really suffers, though, is on its weapon placement, because you can see it's all on the right-hand side. And it's got these 2 ammo points. So you basically, if you get into the right torso, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of basically destroying the mech. That's bad, obviously. So yeah, it's just let me try explain this a little bit. So weapon placement, I think in general, it's always kind of seen that like, a lot of people say that they like weapons on the torsos, and they like it spread out across the torso, so that if one side of your mech gets blown up, you can still fire with it, you can still use it. With a Griffin, if anything, it doesn't really matter anyway, because if the ammo pops, the mech just blows up anyway, so you can't get away from that. But if you're taking damage, or your opponent understands the kind of mechanics of how BattleTech works as a tactical game, and they're just closing in on your right hand side with like a light mech that you can't really do anything against, because all your weapons have got that minimum range issue. So the LRM is a 6 minimum range, the PPC is a 3. So if you get something really nasty, like something like a mongoose up close and personable with that can run, and that's got that like a lot of energy weapons on there that can do damage, it's really going to hurt or make the Griffin susceptible to basically just being taken out, and you're losing all your battle value on it, really. And if they really know what they're doing, and they're kind of closing in on your right-hand side, so they get like a higher chance of hitting that right-hand side, it's just very easy to kind of get these weapons like stripped off the mech. Whereas, something like the Wolverine, you've got the weapon placement all over the mech. It's even got it's got an M-Laser in its head. It's got the ASC 5 on the right arm, and it's got the SRM6 on the left torso. So it's nicely spread out. But the Griffin just, bit problematic. Another issue as well, although this, I suppose in a way, kind of adds to its advantage, the jump jets have been moved up from the legs to the torsos, unlike the Wolverine. really quite necessary, I suppose, in regards to the Wolverine here, because it's got nothing at all on the left torso. So if there was nothing there, that would just be a disaster, because you'd be able to just do all that like movement damage right into the centre torso, which would just cripple the mech. So that's not good. You can see there is a heatsink just randomly on the centre torso. I'd have much preferred that to be on the left torso, but you know, again, the designers put these little quirks in there so that you have to basically think about how you manage the mech. But to that end as well, if you're getting any hits on the legs, something's going to get broken. You then lose your ability potentially to run. So you're going to be jumping, you're going to be generating more heat, then that's going to harm your efficiency with your weaponry and your heat management. So yeah, it's just a mech that I have used the Griffin many, many times on tabletop, but I can't say I've ever enjoyed using it. It's a mech that it's such a one-trick pony, really. Like, you can't do anything else with it. You can't, you know, like with the Wolverine is, you know, all these mechs have the same physical damage profile, so they're all 6/11s, so 6 punch damage, 11 kick damage. With a Wolverine, you've got the weapon loadout to have a reason to be up close and personal to the enemy. With the Griffin, you don't. Now, it's not to say it can look after itself in, you know, in physical combat, and you know, I suppose we're not talking about quirks, but it does have the Battle Fists quirk, so that gives it a really solid advantage. But again, we're not going to say that for the purposes of the analysis in this video. But you know, just a really, really like disappointing mech, really, in terms of and it's hard because it's just all on the same side. If they'd have split that out a little bit, I would have been more comfortable. I think as well, if it had again maybe just dropped some armor and just tried to do something slightly different with how all these slots are like positioned, would have been far more like interested then as far as like running it on tabletop goes. So I think certainly for me the weakest of all the three brothers. Finally, then, let's talk about the Shadowhawk. Now, before we talk about the Shadowhawk, it's very important to say, very few people like the Shadowhawk. It gets a lot of like criticism across the, you know, across like the tabletop fan base. You know, the weapons are quite mismatching. It doesn't do great levels of damage. But I am going to now kind of couple this with my little hypothesis on why I think the Shadowhawk is actually the best of the three brothers. I think it is better than the Wolverine, and I'm going to talk you through why I feel that way. So let's do it just as we did to the other two. So movement profile, different for the Shadowhawk. It is just a jump 3. Now, that to me, the Wolverine, because it's got that 5 jump capability, that makes it a really like obvious cavalry mech. The Shadowhawk can perform a cavalry role as well, but it's certainly not as effective as the Wolverine because of its weapon loadout and because it can't jump as far. But the speed is still the same, so you can still get good positionals with that run of 8. I'd just argue that the 3 jump on a Shadowhawk is just to basically get yourself out of trouble. So it's there if you need it. You know, it's only 1.5 tons because each jump jet on medium or a light mech weighs half a ton. So it's not taking up a vast amount of space. And it does cut its battle value down as well, which we'll talk about when I've gone through this with all 3 of the mechs. So yeah, not as good, but again, I don't really have an issue with that because I wouldn't use it in the same role as the Wolverine. Weapon loadout, almost like relatively similar to a Wolverine. It's got the auto cannon 5, but it's got it on the left torso this time, so it's kind of up on high as opposed to in the Wolverine's right arm. It's got an LRM5 on the right torso, a medium laser on the right arm, and then a solitary SRM2 on the head, which is quite a bizarre choice. I will grant you that. It's quite weird. Armor levels for this mech are, I think, slightly lower than the Wolverine and the Griffin. I don't mind that though. I think, again, for a Succession War 55 tonner, that's absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned. So I'd have no problem with that. But let's talk about where I think the strength of the Shadowheart lies, and that is in its placements. So unlike the other mechs, which have got that, like, you know, they've got a weakness somewhere. To me, there are no weaknesses really across the Shadowhawk's placement. Keep in mind, because there are only 3 jump jets, You can't do that like double jump double jump jet thing on the legs. Even if you just put one in there, to me that's not really beneficial. You need the two, so you get a 1 in 3 shot on a crit of hitting the jump jet, which then saves your actuators. Not worth doing with just one on there. So I think they're actually better positioned actually up high. You've got a 1 in 6 chance of getting the AC5 ammo and a 1 in 4 chance of getting the LRM5 ammo. And then there's the SRM2 ammo, which is in the centre torso, which, as anyone who has played Succession Wars will tell you, the two best places to put ammo are the centre torso and the head. Because the centre torso is so well defended anyway, because it's got the highest level of armour and structure, but also because you get a 1 in 12 chance of hitting it. So the chance of it going pop are really quite remote. So you can, you kind of accept it just being there. On the head as well, I know that seems counterintuitive to put ammo on the head because it will blow your head up, but do keep in mind that if you get a head crit, you have to basically roll for that cockpit hit anyway, and if you hit the cockpit, the mech is dead and the pilot is dead or the mech warrior is dead. So, putting ammo in there, it's just like it's a bit more of a threat, but you've got less of a chance getting into it anyway, so that changes as you kind of progress up the eras in BattleTech, because eventually it would be devastatingly stupid to put ammo in the head, especially on mechs which have got insane levels of battle value, and you've got case, obviously, which kind of mitigates all the ammo explosion problems. But just for survivability, and because the Shadowhawk, unlike the Wolverine, isn't just playing a regular old cav role, Shadowheart can play many other types of play. It can do that skirmish role. It can hit from afar. Yes, it's not as good as the Griffin in terms of damage output, but it's got the autocannon 5, the LRM5 on there, and then the M laser and the SRM2 to close down. Another great thing about the Shadowhawk is its heat management. By far the best heat management of all the three brothers. So it's got 12 heat sinks on there. Can only do a maximum of 3 for its movement, because 3 jump jets, so it's doing 2 through running or 1 through walking. And then it's totaling in at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 on weapons, 3 on jumping. That gives it a -1 on an alpha strike for heat efficiency, which is superb. In fact, you could do that fusion engine hit where you generate more heat a turn if your fusion engine gets hit. But you won't really see it because you're not going to be using these weapons all in tandem anyway. You're not going to be doing alpha strikes with it. You'll either be too close and you'll have to do the medium laser and the SRM2, and maybe you'd fire your autocannon as well, because the minimum range penalty is less not as bad as the LRM5, which is a 6 on the minimum range penalty. But another thing that I really like about the Shadowhawk is that its ability, because it is a mech that you really are able to get up close and personal with a competition, with your opposition in. I think it's a mech that excels at physical combat to some extent. So, if you just want to charge in there with a 55-ton mech, it runs at 5, so for charge attacks, you can attack with that left arm without any penalty to weapons. So you can still fire with a right arm M laser, and you can then do a physical attack. That's very useful. If they'd have put the SRM2 on the left arm, that you would have only been able to fire it or punch somebody. I think generally with the Shadowhawks, though, you're going to be going in for a kick. Does that nice 11 points of damage. That's the same for all the mechs that we've discussed here. You could do exactly this with a Wolverine as well. I just think on the Shadowhawk, it's got the most versatility out of all the three brothers. It's got the best placements and it's got the best heat management. And I think that, honestly, this zeitgeist of, the Wolverine is just the best and the Shadowhawk is just the worst. It's actually, to me, that's completely wrong. The Shadowhawk is slightly the best. I think the Wolverine, absolutely, if you're talking about, if I consider in Succession Wars the Wolverine say a B+, I'd also consider the Shadowhawk a B+ as well for my style play, but I'd always opt it in front of a Wolverine, therefore I'd give it the title. And a Griffin, I'd really give it a C, maybe a C+ if I'm being kind, because it's got the PPC on there, which is a great weapon, but heat management's not great, and everything else on there just doesn't really cut it for me. Finally then, let's talk about this in terms of battle value, because that is a really important factor here. And this again for all the 3 variants that we're showing here. And I think this will surprise a lot of people. The Griffin is the most expensive, so that comes in at 1,272 battle value 2. The Wolverine comes in at 1,101 battle value 2, and the Shadowhawk wins this with a 1,064 battle value 2, or a 1,064 battle value 2. That makes it 200 points cheaper than a Griffin. It's far more versatile, it's far more heat efficient, it's got far better placement, so it's got more survivability. I don't consider it even a discussion that the Griffin should be in that, within that top two. I think it certainly is between the Wolverine and the Shadowhawk. And again, the Shadowhawk gets it for me just because it's such a great safe mech. And it's not good at anything. In fact, it's probably just like under good. Just not, it's under average at everything. But that really gives it a strength in its own right. And it's a mech that I'd highly recommend that you look at again in terms of like Succession Wars. Don't just assume that the Wolverine is the one thing that, out of the three that you want to take. I think the Shadowheart can do a very effective job for players that know what they are doing. And again, I think they've been very clever. I don't know if the original creators of the Shadowheart 2H did this, that it just looks like prima facie that it's just a bad mech. But then you drill down into it and you start seeing those little strengths that all add up that make it into a really solid and efficient little machine. So yeah, have another look at him. And obviously as you then get into the eras, you do get some great Shadowhawks. You get like one in the Fedcom Civil War that I use quite often with the Rack 5 on there, which is a lovely variant of the Shadowhawk. So yeah, have a look again anyway. Just food for thought, this one. And I always like to kind of counter some of the regular like zeitgeist that goes on across the community. I think another point as well, and this is completely not within the confines of what we're talking about here, but the Shadowhawk just looks awesome. It's actually my favourite out of all three of the brothers in terms of its like general aesthetic. I think the Wolverine looks fantastic as well. The Griffin I've always been a bit meh about. Maybe that's because I don't really like its play style. Not keen on its like big shoulder pads. I'm also not a Lyran fan, and it's very much like a mech associated with the Lyrans. The Shadowhawk for me is like the real, like the workhorse of the three brothers, the sensible of the three brothers, the brother that will go out there and earn a day's wage and do its job. The Wolverine's like the flashy one that gets the girl, and the Griffin is the eldest born who inherits everything. That's pretty useless. I suppose that's how I'd kind of turn that off. But yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's my little thought on the three brothers. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm not going to promise anything now in terms of my like recording over the next couple of months. You will see me when you see me, I think. I will, if I do videos, I will try to get them out at the back end of the week. But yeah, you might see my schedule just being very chaotic. And, who knows, we might have some news drop and I get like a free evening or something. I can do like a video on some news. But we'll see what happens. So with that, I will thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you again next time.